We will now have a panel discussion on the right to energy. Although I have to admit that I will take a bit of liberty like Stefan did in the morning. I might change some of the questions to the discussion because there were so many intriguing things said today in the presentations that maybe it's a bit stupid to stick to the questions that were prepared. So it might not be touching only right to energy, but also other fields, but I hope you will excuse us for that. I wanted to kick off the discussion with the three asks of the Right to Energy Coalition. Stefan already did one part of the work for me because he presented the Right to Energy Coalition. And now, because we're really happy to have the coordinator of the Right to Energy Coalition with us, she will do the other part of the work for me, and she will tell you what the three asks of the Right to Energy Coalition are. Laia, thank you.
Hi, thanks a lot. I have to say that before yesterday, I didn't know that this was going to happen. I just registered because I love the program. But yeah, I'm very happy to explain a little bit what the Right to Energy Coalition is and what are our demands. So as also Stefan briefly said this morning, we are kind of like a really diverse membership coalition. We have around 40 organizations. These are trade unions, social justice groups, solidarity collectives, health organization. Also, we have social, environmental NGO, housing providers. So actually, yeah, it's very broad. And we all come together out of the conviction that our energy system does not serve the people nor the planet, and that access to clean and affordable energy is a right and not a luxury. So out of this conviction, we have identified three essential ways to eradicate energy poverty in Europe. I'm sorry if I'm a bit nervous. But yeah, well, so these three are access to affordable clean energy and as a basic human right, promote and ensure energy democracy, and guarantee decent, energy efficient and affordable housing for all. So let me elaborate a little bit more on these three. So the first, we should make access to affordable clean energy as a basic human right, which means that we all should have guaranteed access to a minimum amount of energy, which means that the inhumane practices of energy disconnection should stop immediately. Those put people's lives in danger and should be prohibited by law. We also support that we have to provide the support needed for those that cannot afford to light, heat or cool their homes with, for example, social tariffs, or a more radical and my personal favorite, free minimum band of energy for all. And the second one is to promote and ensure energy democracy, which relates also what we're discussing earlier today about energy ownership and having decision-making power. People should have the right to make decisions about what energy they use and how it is generated. And thus, we need regulatory frameworks to be developed to support this right, and including setting up and participating in community energy initiatives. We defend and advocate for the democratization of the energy system through public and community ownership and control and total control of energy, as we firmly believe that it is a necessary condition to ensure a just transition to fossil fuel-free energy systems. And third, the third one is to guarantee decent, energy efficient and affordable housing for all. And currently, the EU is revising a law that will boost renovation, and that, if done right, it can particularly benefit low-income households living in the worst-performing homes. We stand by that massive renovation can help to address energy poverty and the housing crisis in Europe by providing decent homes with no leaks, nor damp or mold homes that don't make the people that live in sick, and that don't waste energy and don't warm further our climate. Thus, renovating our homes and increasing energy efficiency has the potential to help to address energy poverty and cut our emissions while creating millions of jobs. But uh, we have also seen earlier today how not at all straightforward this is, and how complex it can be to actually ensure that renovations for those living in energy poverty and unfit housing actually brings better lives for those people that live in these homes and do not lead to renovictions. And the coalition, we advocate in order to try to avoid these damaging unintended effects on renovations, for the European Union to take a lead in directing funds and mobilizing political will for renovation programs clearly directed and targeted to benefit the vulnerable and low-income groups. So the EU must ensure strong social safeguards are put in place to guarantee that no additional cost in housing or bills are passed to vulnerable households, because we definitely need to avoid renovictions at all costs, but we also need to avoid vulnerable households to be left behind in unfit housings, and that damages their health and forces them to choose between eating or heating. So that's it.
Thank you so much, Laya. I apologize for pushing you to the spotlight, but I think the Right to Energy Coalition indeed does very important work, and it's better that you hear about it from the words of someone who is doing the work on a daily basis than my interpretation of it. Yeah, I would just like to rectify one small mistake that I did. I forgot to introduce the panel. Well, the three panelists you know, but there is a new face between us. It's Dr. Saška Petrova from University of Manchester, and she's researching the nexus of gender, precarity, and energy resources. And since we heard on Monday that the panel was seriously gender unbalanced, I had to make sure that we have a bit better balance in the panel. So no, but I think Saška contributes a lot with her gender perspective, so welcome with us. And let us maybe kick off the discussion. I would maybe first jump to the energy democracy. Rachel, do you think that energy democracy can be an answer to inequalities in the energy sphere or answer to energy poverty?
Okay, thank you very much, Lydia, because you asked the question that I should have tackled this morning, but I didn't actually. So, as we started talking about that this morning, so energy democracy first is a very contested and not super well defined concept. It's a strong political concept also to highlight the failure of the current system. And it's to say that we have to give back control over the energy issues to people, control, ownership, decision-making, participation. If we look at renewable energy community, in the survey we carried out with two colleagues, we show something interesting. First of all, and that would be the bridge with what Saška is probably going to tackle. The representativity of the population is not there in the membership, so typically women. I think at best in our answer, the contributors said that maximum 30% of the member boards were women. And that was the best answer we got. It was rather more towards 5% than 30% in general. So this is a first point that is not tackling some kind of injustice we tackled this morning. Another point is the fact that low-income households don't have the means to enter as a member the renewable energy communities. So there is still something missing here, some link between this renewable energy community and how they can address energy poverty per se, meaning giving energy services to these people and also integrating them in the decision-making process of both the renewable energy community and giving them a voice to shape the future current energy transition. So I think potentially there is a way, there is an option here to transform, or to give answers to people as users, consumers, to give answers as to people as producers, and to give answers to people as decision makers. But it's still on the way, and the survey we did shows that there is still a long way to go until these renewable energy communities are able to tackle fully energy poverty. But good news, because we always try to to stop with some positive aspect, there are also other initiatives than renewable energy communities that are able also to tackle these points. So this morning it was just about renewable energy communities, and democracy means really involving people. So my message this morning was do not do energy transition for the people, but with the people. And I think that could be a shorter way to say what energy democracy could mean.
Yeah. Does anyone want to comment additionally? If not, then I'm gonna jump to the next question. And Sashka, I would like to ask you, we were listening today to, basically it was a sort of red line through the three presentations that we're facing the challenge of the just transition, perpetuating the inequalities of the current energy system, just taking them to a different field. How does it feel to you? Does it do that also for the gender, from the gender perspective? Do you also see the just transition as a way to perpetuate the gender disbalances that are currently existing?
Thank you, Lydia, and thank you for inviting me to come here today and to meet you all, guys. I'm a latecomer, so I will try to summarize some of my points really quickly. I mean, to be honest, any energy transition can be just a socio-technical fix if we don't look into accountability, if we don't look into really what it means for our political system. I was asked to talk about gender issues, and so basically yesterday we had a public debate, and again I said, sometimes we pretend like in Europe we don't live in a patriarchal society. We totally live in a patriarchal society, and it's getting worse. And it's there are so many new anti-gender policies. There are so many, like anti-abortion, and if we talk about social movements, there are so many anti-protest policies. So I think it's unfounded to talk about energy as extracted from that kind of broader context. So we can't talk about just energy transitions if we don't live in just societies. We can forget about that. In terms of gender, most of our research, first of all, for a long time, we believed in our society, especially with the focus like Eurocentric focus. We believed because we are beyond the patriarchy. We believe that there is no need to research gender or to think about feminism, ecofeminism, and all those things because, you know, we are all equal. I think quite the opposite. And I think we definitely need to revisit some of the basic aspects of what it means to be equal and what it means to be democratic in our society. The research that is done in energy has been totally gender blind. But even the research that is emerging, it's not about gender. It's about two binary sexes. So we have no idea what is happening outside heterosexual nuclear families. Most of our research is done in heterosexual nuclear families where you have a family, man, woman, and like a couple of children. The ideal kind of like nuclear family. Even in emerging questionnaires, we still fight to include even something like male, female, other, I don't want to say. Just some basic things. If we are not able even to include that in quantitative research, I think what is really, really needed is more focused on quality, is a bigger focus on qualitative research. So we really need to find those stories. We need to be able to communicate those stories, and we need to be able to give a voice to people who, unfortunately, do not figure in any of the official statistics. So I think, I mean, I can give you statistics like, of course, we have some statistics that shows that single parents or households led by women tend to suffer more from energy deprivation. Pensioners, especially female pensioners, tend to suffer more. But of course, as I said, if we have gender pay gaps, if we have gendered pension gaps, if we have unrecognized labor, if we still, avoid discussions about social reproduction, and more lately, especially with regards to climate change, if we don't talk about social environmental reproduction, I mean, of course, why does it come as a surprise to talk that there are actually gender inequalities with regards to energy? It's just another topic that can be addressed. But I think these broader systemic issues should be taken into consideration. If I knew that I'm going to get this reaction, I would have come earlier. We know.
Yeah. The more difficult part of the question. So, how can we try to implement it, especially being faced with a capitalistic framework, which is probably going to perceive this as a threat to its existence?
Yeah, I would add not just a threat, but also it could be seen as an opportunity, and that's even the more dangerous, pernicious element of this, because if you put in if you essentially rarefy a right to energy under particular circumstances, it could then be propertized, assetized, or it could be also seen as the only minimal entitlement that someone has the right to and nothing more than that. So I think this is a really important discussion. What, you've hit the nail on the head. How do you operationalize the right to energy? And here there are at least, I would say, three things that matter. So first of all, the right to energy is not just the right to a certain amount of consumption of energy. It is also the right to control and to have democratic, uh, not just democratic control, but democratic influence over the governance of the energy system. So obviously, a lot of people, when they, companies would love to say, well, here's the right to energy. We throw 3 kilowatt hours at you, our job is done. But I think the right to energy is also about where's the public control to right to energy? Who runs these boards of companies? Who are they private? Are they public? Where is the regulation of the sector going? That is also part of the energy system. And even broader than that, and a debate that's been going across this whole conference, where are the supply chains of the energy resources that we're getting? So the fact that there is a huge north-south imbalance, that there are resources flowing, extraction flowing from the global south into the global north. So the right to energy is the right also to control the system, to have the right of democratic governance across the system for every citizen on the planet. Now, beyond that, there are two other considerations. The second one is we need to think of the right to energy not just as, and again, this is something that becomes very easy to say, not as just the right to a certain amount of energy, but also as the right to energy services. And here it becomes complicated because energy services is the benefit that we need, right? In my home, I cannot plug my finger into the electricity and get electricity from it. I've tried, I believe it doesn't work, right? So as a kid, twice. So, and it doesn't work. So I did not get any right to energy there. But again, the fact is when you live, and it was brought up earlier by our Right to Energy Coalition colleagues, people live in inadequately warm homes that are poorly insulated, or they don't even have access to the grid infrastructure at all. And so the question is, when you provide the right to energy, you have to think of the right to the final service that the consumer receives, or the citizen, or the resident receives, which is heat, which is light, which is cool, right? In this weather, we're reminded of it, and so on. So the right to energy has to be the right to the energy service, again, for every citizen of the planet, which brings us again into this discussion of energy sufficiency. Because when we start to think, what is the sufficient level of energy for everyone to work? What is the decent level for everyone to work? Then that then becomes paramount. It's that, not that some people start to go much more than that decent or sufficient level of energy. So those are, for me, the crucial things. The third element of this is that, in fact, the right to energy has to be something that is constantly negotiated, discussed, not just through democratic control, but dynamically updated and changed and transformed, so that it's not a fixed thing. You mentioned something really interesting at an event, Lydia, which is people, the right to disconnections, right? There is a law that says you can, you're not going to be disconnected, and people get disconnected anyway. And that for me is an example of, there's a right to be not disconnected, yet the implementation of that law is actually something that doesn't work. And that's because, again, there is not enough, someone just threw the law at people, said, you have the law, we have no, but in fact, how is that enacted? How is that discussed? How is that implemented? Becomes really important. So it's not just democratic control over the whole system, but it's sort of dynamic dialogue and deliberation over the implementation of regulations. So for me, those are really the three things that we have to think about in this right to energy. I'm sorry if it sounds complicated, but I think it's absolutely vital. It's going to come in the future, and it's something that every citizen across the planet deserves. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think you remind us that we are actually just somehow in the initial phases of starting this discussion, and that's why probably I think that the work of the Right to Energy Coalition is so important, because they're really actively, we are, because I'm also following the work of the Right to Energy Coalition, we are opening these discussions, these dilemmas, Gordian knots, basically, that we have to disentangle. I'm not going to repeat this after every question, but if any of the panelists, if you want to comment, you're welcome. Please just signal. I will send the microphone to the other side of the table. Professor Timpas, I would like to ask you, you did mention several ways of how we can actually bring really sustainable renewables into action, but would you care to elaborate a bit more? Like, do you have some more examples?
Thank you. I will take the example, it's a well-known example in the area as well, because Austria, the neighboring country, is the leader on earth in solar heaters, for example. It used to be Greece, now it's Austria, which means it's not just the availability of sun, it's also how the society works. Solar heaters in the last 30, 40 years, without any state subsidies, and without any support to the manufacturers, which usually are not huge companies, ended up removing from the commodity field, from the capitalist commodity market, a good part of electricity consumption, because you have from the sun, through the mediation of a solar heater, you end up having hot water. So it's use, and it's also ownership of the means of production by an individual household for a very moderate amount, for 700 or 1,000 euros in Greece. You can actually do this. Austria jumped ahead because on the top of installing solar heaters, it relied on community associations before the energy communities concepts was around, that's 30, 40 years now, through associations of users, ended up having exchange of know-hows that established it as the first country on earth in the use of solar heaters at the household level. These are not electricity generating artifacts. These are just artifacts, techniques that produce something for use. That again, as I said, removes consumption. And again, it all happened without any state subsidy. So to me, that's a good example of something that's very realistic, that is relatively independent from climate. If Austria jumped ahead of Greece, that tells you that it's also social priorities and social policies, not just technology or availability of the right climate conditions. That's one. Now, beyond this, of course, I would point to the direction of the smallest scale possible, materials that are available around, materials that are recyclable, know-how, and give all the powers. We cannot be against the private in general, the private sector in general. It's a different thing if the private sector is small, small firms at the local level, city, village, island, mountain, of technicians who can jump in this field and constantly be modifying and adjusting energy structures versus the big private sector, the big multinationals that I mentioned earlier. So put these people ahead, give them the right legal and tax incentives, rely on their creativity, and I think this perhaps could lead us to a decentralized model that would be much more friendly, ecological in the present. Just one more note. We did a study, for example, of how an urban municipality in Athens could become relatively energy independent from the use of small-scale installations on the roofs of the buildings, private and public buildings, and small wind towers. And it turns out that no less than 50% can be generated like this, and this will be electricity or energy uses that will not have to be grid connected. They will consume, they will use the energy produced. So there are so many alternatives. The problem is socially this to become hegemonic. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the society and the politics are the key players in how we manage the technology. That's for sure, and that's why maybe the next question is meant to all of you, whoever feels called to answer it. I'm wondering how can we give or how can we open more discussion about the meaning of just transition? Because at the moment we heard it, it's just an empty buzzword that the European Commission is throwing at everyone to keep us happy and pacified. How can we start researching? How can we start discussing it when the cruel reality is that the European Commission is funding only projects that are basically responding to the further needs of the capitalist system and are perpetuating its problems? Do you have any ideas where to start, how to find space for research and discussion and elaboration on what just transition is?
Maybe I give a contra-example what we shouldn't do, maybe, even though I don't want to be normative, but France decided, sorry for the French example again, France decided to organize a Convention des citoyens, so citizen assembly, to talk about what could be done in terms of climate, energy policy, environmental policies, and to deliver recommendations to the government on how they should put that into policies. Guess what happened? Almost nothing. Out of the many recommendations, the citizens, so I mean it's part of the just transition, out of the many solutions that were, most of them were evidence-based with good practice, also illustrating what they were recommending, only a few of them were integrating in the policy system of France. So it means that even if we go democratic, even if, let's say, there is a willingness to organize something, to do as if we were listening to the voice of the people, the end result is that it's not integrated anyway. So I don't know if you have a solution to that.
I don't think I have a solution. I'm not a policy maker. I'm usually there to poke policy makers. But the thing is, I think some things have been achieved. I remember it was several years ago. We had a presentation with the European Parliament. They asked us to talk about energy poverty, which was a totally domestic issue. So not about the big issues around energy security, energy production, but just about energy poverty, which is, you know, in the home, like small energy with a small e. And then when we started talking that actually the domestic cannot be separated from the broader energy system, at that time at the European Commission, they were like, we had the renewable energy part and the energy transitions, energy security, and this is more of a kind of like a social policy on the other side. When we actually started talking that the two should come together, they were like, really? How? Why? But then, with the kind of these new packages, the clean energy for all, the green energy transitions actually link the domestic, the energy production, energy supply, and energy demand together. So that's a big step. The new directive that you mentioned, Rochelle, is like only, what, 3 years old? I think there is still a lot of potential with regards to renewable energy communities, with regards to like cooperatives and stuff. It's up to us how we are going to reimagine and the pressure that we're going to put on policymakers to think about them. I always say now maybe the next step would be how to regulate energy cooperatives and energy, for example, communities. Why do I need to talk about gender or diversity? Just say that, for example, at least 30 to 50% of the energy communities should include members, shareholders from marginalized communities, and actually they're not only about gender, but more intersectionally, like race, ethnicity, you know, body ability, and so on. So we can regulate those things, and I think maybe there is still actually some room there to negotiate stuff. So I don't think that actually it's a dead end. But for me, actually, that's accountability, and everything is in the making. So, yes, I mean, I don't have the solution, but still, I think there is a lot of potential there. Even things now that we see like they can't happen, they might happen, but what about, you know, the questions that we are going to ask when they happen?
Thank you. I'm just going to add on the table an angle that might turn out to be important at some point in connection to the energy poverty issue. Paradoxically, sometimes the demand to have equal consumption can obscure energy poverty dimensions that are rather invisible. I'll give you a specific example. In Greece, in the context of the economic crisis that I mentioned before, there were studies about energy poverty. It turned out, however, but the issue was not just the level of consumption, but also the quality of the devices that you were using, appliances. Because the poorest a family, household, an individual was, the more he or she would need higher consumption because the appliances, the devices used to heat, for heating or for cooking or for whatever, were just of the poorest quality. There are in the market out there heaters for the winter that you can buy for 20 euros, and then there are heaters that you can buy for 200 euros for the same capacity, for the same place. And so seemingly, it's an issue just of two supplies, two households consuming the same amount, but it's not just this. There may be other phenomena behind. I'll stop here without opening the big issue of how renewability is connected to poverty in the same direction. Because it seems as if renewability is a luxury and all that, but going back to my talk, I would say that there is a way, by focusing on care, to actually address both the issue of class and poverty and the issue of protecting the environment. Thank you.
Thank you. I still have a lot of questions on my list, but apparently this is not just my private discussion with the nice colleagues here at the table. So I would like to open the floor to you, and I would like to ask you, do you have any questions? Do you still want to open some points of discussion with the panelists?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think I have a few questions in one. It's a lot of thought-provoking discussions and presentations today. But I was wondering because you mentioned, I think it was Raquel, you mentioned that it's energy democracy is a strongly political concept. So it's all about bringing the power back to the people. But at the same time, a couple of presenters today said that they're observing a certain rebranding of energy democracy. So kind of going from calling cooperatives to communities because of certain, I don't know, radically leftist associations with the word cooperative. So I was wondering if we as academics, if we buy into this and if we also call it renewable energy communities, do we kind of make room for co-opting these ideas? And because you did mention that they are being co-opted, that there are these kind of gated communities of the wealthy who have the capital to invest and they can become independent. So I was just kind of, yeah, I guess my question is, what do we do about it? How do we protect ourselves and our ideas from being co-opted by neoliberalism? And my other question is, it's a bit of a hot take, but kind of if we're learning so much about the problematic aspect of renewable energy sources and how they are neo-colonial in its nature and exploiting the minerals and so on, then would it really be such a bad thing if there was an energy cooperative based on fossil fuels? So I was just kind of wondering what if in a mining region, for example, with people who work in the mines, they have the know-how, the research is domestic, is local. What if they create cooperative, and would we be willing to accept that if it actually brought reductions of consumption and emission? Or, because sometimes I'm wondering if we're not kind of demonizing fossil fuels too much and glorifying renewable energy sources too much. So just, yeah, these two questions.
I guess this is actually a question for all of us, because you talk about the impact of neoliberal economies on this wording that we're using as well. And this afternoon we have this question about the sustainability of all this. So regarding, it's a very provocative question. I would say to start with your second question regarding the mining industry, maybe there are cooperatives, I must say, I don't know, but there are villages where miners are living where they created cooperatives, not necessarily energy cooperative, but other forms of cooperatives. And the first cooperatives, not energy cooperatives that were created, we need to remember that, they were created out of necessity against the capital, against the start of the Industrial Revolution and capitalism somehow. So it means cooperative, I mean, regardless of if it's an energy cooperative, a production cooperative, an agricultural cooperative, and so on, they emerge from a movement against the economy, against the state of the economy at the time. And I have the feeling that when we talk about, I mean, when at least I talk about energy communities and cooperatives right now, it's also a sign to fight against the current situation and to give back power to people. We have to be careful about one thing, not to end up with populist system after that. So, I mean, this is, again, it's not a silver bullet, but there are organizations that are also there. We need enabling framework as well to make it doable as a way to give the voice, to give the possibility to people to do something in the energy sector, to own the decision as well, not like what we did with the climate convention in France, but really when people have ideas that we can consider that, okay, it's not because it doesn't come from experts that we have bad ideas. On the opposite, that could be very interesting, but we have to be careful that we don't end up with populism. And on your question regarding miners, they may not have cooperatives, but they have trade unions. And trade unions is also a way to express something collectively and not individually on a matter. So I know I'm not answering your questions, but that is my first reaction. Regarding why we use renewable energy community, or at least why I used it this morning, is just because it's a definition in the directive, and there are many other ways to call it, but this is the common definition we have. So it was not ideologically chosen, it was really based on the, let's say, legal definition of the renewable energy directive.
I mean, those are very, very interesting questions. And I think my whole life, because I started my career as an activist and I ended up in academia, I have always been interested in bottom-up, kind of localized struggles and everything. What worries me sometimes about this kind of local and the focus on the romanticization of the local is, as Rochelle mentioned, some of these kind of populist ideas. And my recent work focuses on precarity, which is basically about politically induced injustices, and also the struggles and the resistance, the way in which kind of people can operationalize their agency, and they actually resist it. What worries me these days is that sometimes this kind of anti-precarity politics can become the politics of my precarity against your precarity. And actually, this kind of localization of all those struggles can become the kind of our struggles against your struggles. But who are we? And what worries me here the most is actually then anti-immigrant policies, the kind of the close ideas, the very, very localized ideas that might be the best. I always say when we talk about, for example, nature conservation, I mean, Hitler had a great idea about nature conservation. But what worries me very much is actually to avoid some of the eco-fascist ideas around populism. And we really need to think about some of the basics of democracies, what it means that we want to have as our society. Who are the locals? We've learned, and one thing that I also wanted to say is that I think now is the time that this kind of powerful global north to learn something from the struggles from what we refer to as the global south. The basic electricity load, all those policies have been implemented for a long time in many of the countries in Africa. We've done some research on basic electricity load in South Africa. People there know why it works and why it doesn't work. So maybe we can open up some of our ideas. We talk a lot about decolonizing knowledge, decolonizing ideas. I think there is a lot of potential there to learn from it. But thinking about the local, we also need to remember that the energy market is a global market. We can pretend as much as we want. The energy supply system is a global energy supply system. The maintenance, our grids and everything, they're very much centralized still. The ideas around off-grid are fantastic and they have a lot of potential. But what worries me is actually the most vulnerable will stay stuck and attached to the grids, and they will pay the largest part of the bill for the maintenance of those obsolete grids, and they will not have other solutions. So when we talk about off-grid, solutions, localized production of energies, all of that is fantastic. But we really need to go back to some of those basic principles around democracy and being an inclusive society.
About the first part that you mentioned, if we should be concerned about neoliberalism endorsing the ideas, our ideas, I wouldn't be concerned. The rich, the few, the many, the poor were never in trouble whenever concerned about the rich endorsing their ideas about their interests. It's always the rich who convince the poor, that's ideology, that their interests are the interests of the poor. And one example would be, to continue on what was just said, it's a secret, I would say, that the modern electric power networks, all electric modern power networks, were made possible by the poor, everybody, subsidizing the rich through what is called, for example, industrial rate. The industries, the factories, have been paying from the beginning a lowest rate, lowest prices of electricity per unit of consumption than the average person. In other words, it would have never been possible for profits to be made in the industry through electricity and the networks if it wasn't for the fact that everybody else was subsidizing them. And it's more complex than that. The design of the networks, of the lines, initially of the electric power lines, connecting places where there were coal or other fuels depositories to the factories, were not drawn so as to satisfy consumption used by the people, by the citizen, by the cities. It was first the big industries that were taking into account. And so that's one thing, and it's very interesting. Now about this points to the notion of state. Is the state a solution? I don't say that I heard this. In my opinion, no. And the example is that in the case of some state power companies, all that they can think of is just reproduce in the area of big wind farms the model that they know from big lignite, big coal, big hydro electric plants. Whereas we need something different. We need more of a public approach in the context of a state. We need states that will, if the state is a balance between the private and the private, we need more public. We need power companies that will allow localities, energy communities, everything that was said so far, to move beyond the idea of just providing cheap electricity to everybody on a universal scale. That's important, but for what interests us here, which is addressing the environmental crisis, we also need more public, not just cheap state energy or electricity and all that. I'm not sure I disagree with anybody. I just wanted to, to mention this.
We have time for still one quick question.
I will try to be quick. Yeah, thank you very much for all the presentations today and for the discussion. I don't have much of a background of this topic, so I've learned a lot. And I have a question that I don't mean it to be polemic. I just really, it comes out of understanding. When we talk about just transitions, most of the topic I've heard today come from the global north. And I would like to understand a little bit how this transition happens in the global north if it doesn't consider the global south, when this transition in a way implies resources that will come from the global south. So starting from the point this morning on the definition of energy poverty in the global north, I didn't even know that there was a different definition for the global north. For me, that didn't exist in the global north. So I wonder, how is it possible from your perspective to talk about reducing energy poverty that already has a different definition without reducing it somewhere else? And how is it just for one part of the world without considering the other, even though this transition needs the other? So yeah, that's pretty much my question, really just out of trying to understand more on the topic.
Thank you. Yeah. So I don't know. I may have missed the bit where there was a Oh, right. Did you make the north and south distinction? Okay. But did you use the word secure? Okay, because I think one of the challenges we've had certainly in the energy justice field is that historically we inhabited a space where there were two different historical traditions around energy injustice. One emerging, this was very stupid, by the way, one emerging from the global south that said, oh, for the global south, people in the global south need access, so they need better access to energy, and people in the global north need affordability, so cheaper energy. So the assumption there was that the global south needs to have more electrification, which came from this developmentalist approach of the World Bank and so on in the 60s. And the assumption for the global north was all the grids are there and so on, it just needs cheaper energy. So in 2015, Sashka and I wrote this paper which talked about this binary about between the global north and global south, which we found very problematic, and particularly this axis between between affordability and access being not a binary, but really a continuum and really a hybrid, whereas in fact there wasn't two definitions, but there was only one, which was any person in the world needs energy services. They need energy in their home. They need energy to thrive and to survive. They need energy to function in their society. So that comes back to some people like Amartya Sen, who say, whoever has energy, they have to have the capabilities to work in their society. So this definition that says it's affordability or access is actually a false binary, and it comes from a very colonial understanding where, in fact, you have to, for the global north, you don't have to think about where energies come from. You just have to make sure consumers get it cheaply, and for the global south, you just have to make sure that they follow a particular model of development. So if anyone has the impression that we're arguing that, so that is actually exactly what we've been arguing against, that we actually need to have a planetary understanding of energy and justice, where every person has to have the same, well, has to have a level of energy services that they need to function. And that brings us then to the question of energy sufficiency. Because when you understand and colleagues in Vienna have been doing this, what a decent living standard is in around to energy, then you start to see that some countries and some citizens have way below that for a range of reasons, which you can start unpacking. But then others have way above that. So there's a huge disbalance there. And what we need to do is try to address those disbalances. And what we need to do is try to address why the people who are underneath that threshold are underneath it. So in that sense, a just transition globally is primarily about allowing people to have a decent amount of energy worldwide, and then secondly, to have to reduce where people, to have to reduce the reasons why others have way more than they need. And so in fact, when we talk about just transitions in that sense, it then becomes about energy sufficiency, and that clean transition then becomes about making sure that we start addressing the root causes of overconsumption in the global north. So I know it's a slightly different subject to what I was talking about earlier, but it is absolutely central to what a lot of us in this space have been arguing. I don't know if anyone else wants to.
I'd like to add something regarding the just transition globally. I think you are absolutely right, and I just want to give an example of a talk I had with some companies who said, but yes, of course, just transition for us is very important in the global north because of the funding we get from the European Commission. But, you know, for the global south, we apply the ESG criteria, so we are safe on the just transition side. So it's really a representation question as well regarding what we mean by just transition globally. And the private sector has this ESG criteria and they think that applying them makes it enough for them to consider just transition globally. So probably there are some issues here as well.
Yeah. As much as I would like to say, please someone run to the shop and grab some beers and bring them here, and we'll continue this discussion because it's something that we can discuss for the next few evenings. I will unfortunately have to wrap up this panel because some of our guests will have to unfortunately depart. So I would like to thank you very much for all the interesting points, all the interesting lines of thought that you shared with us today. Thank you very much also for the very interesting questions. It's really nice to see a room full of people with such great ideas and such deep thinking. So thank you very much. It was really great day. Thank you.